once a city under attack. An invading army had set up a siege outside the city walls and had been there for weeks and months. And the city's food stores and fuel reserves had dwindled to the point where there was nothing left, and the people of that city were beginning to starve. The young ruler of the city realised that he had a terrible decision to make. The day had come to make that decision. Surrender, open the gates of the city, and see the invading army enter and take his people into slavery and bondage, where he himself would almost certainly face his own terrible execution. Or continue to resist and watch his people die slowly and painfully of hunger. It was no decision. He called the citizens together in the square and told them that it was time to raise the white flag of surrender, throw open the gates and lower the drawbridge. "Wait, sire." An old woman stepped forward from the crowd. "I have a plan which will save the city." The ruler looked at her sceptically. "What plan? And why have you never mentioned this before?" "Because, sire, it is only now that the plan could work." Despite himself, the young ruler felt a tiny spark of hope kindle in his heart. "Very well then, let's hear it. First we will need a cow." The flame of hope was extinguished. "A cow! A cow! Have you not understood why we are here? There are no cows. We are starving. Where do you think we will find a cow at this moment in time? Are you delusional?" "Sire, if I may, there will be a cow in this city. Send out your men to look for it. Look high and low. You will find a cow. Yes, I know the city is starving, but some of us are starving more than others." What was there to lose? He would send out his men. In the worst case scenario, it would just delay the inevitable for a couple more hours. And so the young prince sent his soldiers to search high and low for a cow. And lo, a cow was found in the cellar of one of the wealthier houses of the city. The soldiers dragged the cow back to the square, as well as the two owners of that property, who, on seeing the disgusted expression on the face of their rulers, decided not to try to defend themselves, but shuffled to the back of the crowd, hoping to remain out of sight. "Very well, old woman, you have your cow. What would you have us do with it?" "Now we need 2 bags of grain," she announced, and placed 2 empty Hessian sacks on the floor in front of her. There were angry murmurings from among the crowd. "Grain, grain, we are out of grain. How are we to fill 2 bags of grain? Are you mocking us? If we all gather 1 handful of grain and add it to the sacks, we'll fill these 2 bags of grain. Go back to your houses, sweep the floors of your cellar, empty out the bags, look in every nook and cranny, gather up each and every kernel. We can fill these bags. I myself will make the first contribution." And she took a little purse from around her waist and emptied its contents into one of the sacks. She looked over at the ruler of the city. He nodded and did the same. And one by one, each of the citizens of that city went back to their home. They scraped, they swept, they gathered, and they came back to the square with their handfuls of grain. And handful by handful, by slow handful the sacks were filled. You have your sacks of grain. Now what? Asked the prince. Now we feed them to the cow, and the old woman pushed the 2 sackfuls of grain over. The grain spilled out onto the floor and formed a heap in front of them. The crowd surged forward in anger. Now they were ready for her blood. She is not only mad, she is a witch. You steal our food, you give it to a cow. This will not do, sire. You must have her killed. But the prince stepped forward. Peace, friends. This seems a large amount of food, but as we know, divided up between us, it would barely make us 1 meal each. We have nothing to lose. Let us see whether this plan will work. He nodded to the old woman. She brought the cow forward, and the cow began to eat. It scrunched and munched and scrimmered and scraped until every single one of those kernels of grain had been consumed. And then the old woman dragged the cow, tottering on its thin legs, to the gates of the city. The gates were open. She shoved the cow out, and the gates were closed behind it. Now we wait. Outside the walls of the city, a lone sentry, a young man, a young soldier, stood leaning on his rifle, staring at the gates of the city. He had been there since early that morning, and his watch was soon to come to an end. He had been there every day for as long as he could remember, standing, staring at the gates of a city where no one ever went in and no one ever came out. In all the months that he stood there, he had not seen a single movement from the gates of the city, and now, all of a sudden, a cow had appeared on the drawbridge. He rubbed his eyes. Had he fallen asleep on his watch? Was he dreaming? Was it some sort of mirage? He rubbed his eyes again, peered forward in the gathering gloom. There was definitely a cow walking towards him on spindly legs. He dropped his gun, ran up to the cow, grabbed her by her halter and dragged her through that camp. He burst into the captain's tent, where the captain was just about to pour himself a drink and settle down for a nice read with his book. In came the sentry. "Captain! Captain! It's a cow! They've got cows! Look! It's a cow!" "Soldier, calm yourself. One scrawny cow has sent you into this frenzy of nerves? Get a hold of yourself, young man. This cow poses us no threat. Take her along to the butcher. Let's see if we can't at least get a half-decent meal out of her." So the sentry took the cow off, and the captain of the army sat down to think. He was a good deal more concerned than he had let the young soldier see. The cow was clearly a message. But what message? Was it an elaborate bluff? Or where this cow came from, were there cows aplenty? He had not expected the city to resist as long as it had, and he needed it to surrender before the winter came. Because with the first snows, his supply lines would be cut off, and he did not have enough resources to keep his army alive through the winter. As he sat there, the flap of the tent blew open and a gust of cold, bitter wind circled around the tent, bringing with it a few flakes of snow and a premonition of the hard winter to come. A moment later, the flap of the tent opened again and the butcher came in, still wearing his bloody apron and with a knife in his hands that gleamed and glistened with the bright red blood of the cow. His hand was trembling violently. "Captain, I have killed that cow. I have slit her throat and cut her open from head to tail. I have to tell you, her belly was full of food. There were full 2 bags of undigested grain in her stomach. Sire, those people have food to waste on a cow. God only knows how much they have to feed themselves." The captain nodded and made his decision. The army packed up that same night and left. And in the morning, when the ruler of the city commanded the gates to be opened, there was no trace of the invading army to be seen. And that, my friends, is the story of how an old woman, a cow, and 2 bags of grain saved a city.